Found at the very center of the Eldari Harlequin beliefs is Segura, also referred to as the Laughing God, the Great Harlequin, the Great Fool, or the First Fool. He is one of the gods of the Eldar mythology. He is the god of deception, stealth, creativity, art, and trickery. It was he who tricked the Outsiders into eating other Khitans according to Eldari legend during the War in Heaven between the Old Ones and the Necrontyr. Those Harlequins who follow him are protected from Slaaneish's eternal thirst for Eldari souls in a different way than other Craftworld brethren. While Craftworld Eldari wear spirit stones which absorb their souls when they die to prevent them from being devoured by Slaanesh, the Harlequins are directly protected by their faith in their god's power, becoming one with his own warp emanations upon their death. The only exception to this is of course the Harlequin Solitaires, whose souls must be won over from Slaanesh after their death by the Laughing God. Alone amongst the Eldari gods, Segura is believed to have survived the fall of the Eldar and escaped the fate of the rest of the Pantheon, who were consumed by She Who Thirsts. According to legend, this Eldari deity survived because his mocking nature distanced him from the collective psychic corruption and decadence of the ancient Eldar Empire, whose reflection in the Immaterium eventually became the Chaos God Slaanesh. Unknown to the Eldar, Segura is actually one of 3 Eldari gods to have survived the fall, the other 2 being Isha, who is held captive in the Gardens of Nurgle in the realm of chaos within the Warp, and the war god Khaine, who lives on as a fractured collective in his avatars within the infinity circuit of the Eldar Craftworlds. The Eldar mythology explains that while Slaanesh fought with Khaine, the Laughing God escaped into the webway and hid amongst his many tunnels. These tales suggest that he remains there still, unassailed, laughing at the Chaos Gods as he hatches bitter plans for revenge. It is believed that he is the only being in existence who knows every single path through the labyrinthian dimension of the webway. This might explain how his disciples possess such an innate knowledge of the twists and turns, for the Harlequins walk the webway without fear, appearing and disappearing at will. So well versed are they in the webway secret routes that many other Eldar have credited the servants of the Laughing God with supernatural powers. There are those who claim that Segura walks amongst his children from time to time, wearing the disguise of an anonymous Harlequin player. Whatever the truth of such tales, the Laughing God is the only authority that the Harlequins recognize as they fight their wars and perform their mythic dances across the void, and for all the Eldari factions in his name. In recent years, the Harlequins' war against chaos has been characterized by a newfound urgency. Full masks have become ever more common sight amongst the stars. Appearing from the webway, they can be found performing within the realms of the Eldari, Exodites, Drukhari kin, or battling the galaxy's desperate intelligent races in vicious campaigns of apparently random violence. As the 41st millennium of the Terran calendar comes to a close, more and more Eldari of every faction vanish into the webway, forsaking their former lives to take up the Harlequin's mask. The Harlequins' numbers are growing, and many among the Eldari wonder why. The truth is inspirational and terrifying in equal measure. At the very heart of the secret craftworld that lies deep within the most hidden reaches of the webway, the so-called Black Library, there lies a silver-lint vault. Therein stands a plinth made of finely engraved obstinite, upon which rests a crystalline book said to contain the words of Segura himself. Since the fall, the tome's covers have remained closed, sealed shut with flickering chains of light. Yet now, long-awaited omens have come to pass. The fallen sorcerer seeks the lore of the library. The king stirs in his court of death and silence, preparing to rise once more. Within madness' eyes, the champion of the ruinous powers prepared to seize the realm long denied. As the sign of the Rana Dandra have come to pass, so the bands of light about the tome have flickered and died. Now at last the tome has fallen open. With its pages, the Shadowseers have found a script, a secret final act that changes utterly the fate of the fall. Penned in ink of light and shadow, these words represent a slender hope, detailing the intricate galaxy-spanning performance with the potential to change the fate of the Eldari race. Always the strands of fate have pointed towards the victory of chaos during the last mythical battle of creation, known to the Eldari as the Rana Dandra. Yet within the pages of the Crystal Tome is recorded Segura's ultimate jest, a way to trick Slaanesh into expending all her power, not to destroy the Eldari, but to save them. How such an impossibility could come to pass is unclear, for on this matter the final act is extremely vague. Yet the Harlequins take their god's word on faith alone, for their devotion to Segura is total and their methods beyond question or reproach. Thus they have begun the steps for this final dance, and will see it complete, or else face absolute destruction in the attempt. Isha is the Eldari goddess of the harvest, fertility, life, healing, and growth. She is the mother of the Eldar species in Eldari mythology. Often portrayed as a beautiful woman, the goddess is one of the 3 Eldar gods of old, still alive and said to be aiding the dying Eldar as best she can. It is because of Isha that the Eldar race possesses the Spirit Stones, the precious gems worn by the Eldari to protect their souls from she who thirsts upon their death. These stones are said to have been crafted from Isha's tears, so that the gods and mortals would be able to communicate with each other through the barriers erected between the immaterium and real space, a separation created by one of the most powerful of the Eldar gods, Azurian. One of these stones was given to Isha, and the rest were handed over to the Eldari so that their prayers might be heard. When Azurin learned that his directive that the gods were to have no further contact with mortals had been violated, he gave Isha and her husband, Coronus, the god of the hunt, to Khaine, the god of war, to do with as he wished. Khaine tortured the 2 of them in a burning pit until Vol, the Eldari god of crafting, who was Isha and Coronus's uncle, was moved by their plight, and so struck a bargain with the war god to craft 100 enchanted swords, known as the Blades of Vol, for him in 1 year's time. In exchange, Khaine promised to release his fellow gods from his prison. The smith god worked long and hard at this task, and managed to forge all of the blades by the deadline, except for one, the last one, which laid unfinished on his anvil. In order to trick Khaine, Vol substituted the last blade with a mortal one, which he delivered to the war god, who released his 2 captives. The 3 gods then quickly departed. But Khaine was quick to discover the trickery, and cried out in rage. He called the smith god a cheat, and vowed revenge. He immediately set off to track Vol down and make him pay. The conflict that followed, known as the War in Heaven, polarized the gods, as Khaine's factions and Vol's factions engaged in bloody warfare for eternity. Gods exchanged sides. Great deeds of heroism and of terrible evil were performed by both factions. The war was mirrored in an interesting struggle between the Eldari and the mortal realm. Azurin himself never took a side, watching the carnage impassively, slowly coming to regret the sentencing of Isha and Coronus to Khaine's tender mercies. Vol reforged the final sword, the one that he failed to finish for Khaine, the greatest of all. He called it Anaris. Armed with this weapon, Vol strode forth into battle with Khaine. It was a long, hard-fought struggle, but even with Anaris, Vol was no match for the war god. Khaine cast down Vol, maiming the smith and bounding Vol to his own anvil. However, the consort of the great hawk who had fought for Vol, known as the Falcon, Falshu, took the sword Anaris and delivered it to Eldanesh, the greatest warrior and leader of the mortal Eldari. With Anaris in hand, Eldanesh of the Red Moon took up the fight and faced Khaine in single combat. Eldanesh fought well, but in the end, he too was defeated by Khaine, his body crushed by the god of war. As Khaine slew Eldanesh, his hand began to drip with red blood. Forever after, he would become known as Kala Mensha Khaine, which means Khaine the Bloody-Handed in the Eldari lexicon. By this time, Azurin, the greatest of the Eldari gods, had seen enough of the slaughter and proclaimed the war in heaven over. Khaine had gained his vengeance and left the field satisfied. Isha's misfortune would continue many millennia later, during the fall of the Eldar, when Slaanesh took her prisoner rather than absorbing her energies outright like she did the rest of the Eldari pantheon. What fell purpose Slaanesh had in keeping Isha alive, none amongst the Eldari know, but the Prince of Pleasure was ultimately denied its spoils. For some reason, Nurgle, the Plague Lord, waged war against Slaanesh to rescue the Eldari goddess. Why Grandfather Nurgle intervened is unclear, although some Eldari savants believe that one of the oldest of the major Chaos gods wanted to give the youngest amongst them a good lesson about his proper place in the order of things. What is known is that Nurgle's demonic forces proved victorious, and he took the Eldari goddess back to his domain in the realm of Chaos. A goddess of rejuvenation and a god of decay seem at odd pairing, but Nurgle came to adore his new companion like no other being in the universe. However, he shows his love in the only way that the Chaos Gods know how. Nurgle keeps Isha imprisoned in a rusted cage within his personal mansion in the corner of the Plague Garden. It is there that he keeps the cauldrons where he mixes the elements that create all of his plagues and pestilences. Nurgle tests all of these new, virulent creations upon the body of his most favorite companion. As the goddess of healing and the spiritual embodiment of health and growth, Isha can cure herself of these afflictions, but the Plague God gains an idea of their potency by watching how much power the Eldari goddess must expend to cure herself. If he is pleased with how hard Isha must struggle to conquer the disease, Nurgle releases the new creation upon some unsuspecting world, but if not, he starts over, working at his cauldron until he has something new to give to his companion. Isha accepts her lot stoically and fights back against the Plague God's evil in the same way she once fought against Khaine, whispering the cures of these new diseases into the universe so that the mortals might know them and resist the hideous design of Grandfather Nurgle. In recent times, information acquired by the Imperium implies that Isha and the rest of the Eldari gods may have been members of the first sentient species in the galaxy, known to the Eldari as the Ancients and the Imperium as the Old Ones, who were the creators of the Eldari and many of the other intelligent species of the galaxy. If this theory is true, then Isha was once a mortal creature. She could have been one of the most important scientists and creators of the sentient creatures used to fight in the war in heaven, explaining why the Eldar view her as the mother of their species and the goddess of life. Through time, the Eldar, along with many of the other sentient life forms she and the Old Ones created, could have started to worship her as a god, similar in the way that the Imperium worships the Emperor now. This worship could have elevated her to the status of a warp god, or a manifestation of her could have been created in the Immaterium by the psychically powerful warrior races who continued to venerate her even after her death and the end of the war in heaven. This would explain why Isha understands the biological workings of all species, and she understands how to cure the diseases created by Nurgle. Every creature inflicted with illness is her creation, as she cracked the code of biological life during her mortal existence, and now, with her godlike powers, Isha continues to guard over her creatures. There are still others in the Imperium who simply believe that the Eldar gods are nothing more than singular expressions of their species' cultural and psychological needs. Their existence was never real, and the story of Isha is simply a mythological story created by ancient Eldar to explain life, healing, and growth. Khaine is the Eldari god of battle, war, and conflict in the Eldar mythology. In the Eldari pantheon, he is second only to the Phoenix King, Azurian himself in power, and was often described as the most violent and reckless of the gods, making enemies with many of the others. The Eldar myth tells how Azurian handed over the goddess of fertility, Isha, and her husband, Coronis, the god of the hunt, to Khaine, knowing that the war god would punish them for Isha's failure to follow Azurian's orders and shun the mortal race. Khaine tortured the two of them in a burning pit until Vol, the Eldari god of crafting, who was Isha and Coronis' uncle, was moved by their plight, and so struck a bargain with the war god to craft 100 enchanted swords, known as the Blades of Vol, for him in 1 year's time. In exchange, Khaine promised to release his fellow gods from his prison. The smith god worked long and hard at this task, and managed to forge all of the blades by the deadline, except for one, the last one, which laid unfinished on his anvil. In order to trick Khaine, Vol substituted the last blade with a mortal one, which he delivered to the war god, who released his two captives. The three gods then quickly departed. But Khaine was quick to discover the trickery, and cried out in rage. He called the smith god a cheat, and vowed revenge. He immediately set off to track Vol down and make him pay. The conflict that followed, known as the War in Heaven, polarized the gods, as Khaine's factions and Vol's factions engaged in bloody warfare for eternity. Gods exchanged sides. Great deeds of heroism and of terrible evil were performed by both factions. The war was mirrored in an interesting struggle between the Eldari and the mortal realm. Azurin himself never took a side. watching the carnage impassively, slowly coming to regret the sentencing of Isha and Cornus to Khaine's tender mercies. Vol reforged the final sword, the one that he failed to finish for Khaine, the greatest of all. He called it Anaris. Armed with this weapon, Vol strode forth into battle with Khaine. It was a long, hard-fought struggle, but even with Anaris, Vol was no match for the war god. Khaine cast down Vol, maiming the smith and bounding Vol to his own anvil. However, the consort of the great hawk who had fought for Vol, known as the Falcon, Falshu, took the sword Anaris and delivered it to Eldanesh, the greatest warrior and leader of the mortal Eldari. With Anaris in hand, Eldanesh of the Red Moon took up the fight and faced Khaine in single combat. Eldanesh fought well, but in the end, he too was defeated by Khaine, his body crushed by the god of war. As Khaine slew Eldanesh, his hand began to drip with red blood. Forever after, he would become known as Caleb Menshikain, which means Khaine the Bloody-Handed in the Eldari lexicon. By this time, Azurin, the greatest of the Eldari gods, had seen enough of the slaughter and proclaimed the war in heaven over. Khaine had gained his vengeance and left the field satisfied. Khaine's martial prowess would finally meet its match during the fall of the Eldari, when the newly formed Chaos God Slaanesh assaulted Khaine as he had all the other gods. Though their battle was vicious, Slaanesh had already absorbed the power of billions of fallen Eldari souls, and ultimately struck Khaine down. But before the Prince of Chaos could absorb the Eldari god, Khorne, the Chaos God of War and Murder, battled Slaanesh for the power of Khaine, claiming the Eldari deity as his property by right, since he represented the same metaphysical force. During the struggle between the Chaos Gods, Khaine was driven into the material world, where his psychic core was shattered into 1,000 pieces. Each piece came to rest at the heart of an Eldari craft world, where it hibernated within the craft world's infinity circuit, but could be reanimated again to possess a metallic construct body and go to war when needed by the craft world. These constructs became known as the Avatar of Khaine. They were the living embodiment of war, filled with the spirit of the bloody-handed god. The avatars towered over the battlefield, juggernauts of death standing 3 times the height of a man and clad in molten armor of Baroque and Eldritch design. In one hand it clutched a flaming blade, inlaid with potent runes of death, while the other constantly drips blood from the clawed fist, a grim reminder of Khaine's own unquenched thirst for carnage and bloodshed. The most terrible aspect of the Avatar were its eyes, burning pits of rage which embody the very soul of destruction and fill all those who gaze upon them with an inescapable terror and despair. To see the Avatar stride across the battlefield, leaving a trail of flaming footsteps in its wake, is to look upon the face of death and feel the ancient alien anger of the Eldari made manifest. In battle, the Avatar of Khaine is usually only encountered at the head of a large host, leading scores of warrior Eldari and aspect warriors into the foe, using its size and strength to punch holes in the enemy's lines or smash their fortifications to pieces. Such is the power of the Avatar that its blade can cleave main battle tanks in two or hack apart even fortress gates, leaving only scraps of molten metal in its path. Its flaming aura is equally deadly, and those that stray too close to the Avatar feel the heat rolling off its ancient armor, hot enough to burn flesh and set hair and cloth aflame if it passes too near. Between the plates of armor, the skin of the Avatar appears as magma, deep reds and glowing blacks which move with the ponderous motion of lava as they ebb and flow across its body. Understandably, the Avatar suffers little from fiery weapons. Their heat and destructive power washes across it like water might slide off a human skin. Those who witness it and live have seen a true god of war. The Avatar only awakens in times of need, and dwells for most of its existence as little more than a hollow shell, devoid of life or purpose in the heart of the Eldari craft world. Each craft world has its own Avatar, cold and lifeless, seeming merely a charred suit of ancient armor kept within a chamber deep beneath the wraithbone spires and domes. It is a tradition as old as the Eldari themselves that awakens the Avatar and brings vengeful life into its form so that it may march to war against the Eldari's foes. The Eldari choose a bold warrior from amongst their exarchs, a member of their race with the will and courage to embody the Eldari's own skill at arms and thirst for victory. Known as the Young King, this chosen warrior is taken to the deep chamber where the Avatar shell resides, and in a secretive and complex ritual, it is given over, mind, body, and soul to Khaine, so that its essence might fill the Avatar with life and give it the rage and power to go to war. At the completion of the ritual, the Young King is completely consumed by the Avatar and ceases to exist as he once was. His essence instead mingled with that of the bloody-handed god and funneled into the Avatar, giving it the strength and will to move and fight. Almost at once, the Avatar's armor begins to smoke and heat, while the runes of its flesh and weapon begin to glow. Finally, the Avatar's eyes burst into flame, and it rises from its tomb to answer the Eldari summon, and leads his warriors against the enemies of the craft world. Once its task is complete, the Avatar returns to the craft world, its armor cooling and the fires fading from its eyes to sleep once more. Of the Young King, there is no sign, his spirit extinguished by the ordeal, perhaps to sit at the side of Khaine himself like so many young kings before him, or perhaps lost forever in the tides of the immaterial. Another soul spent in the Eldari's slow and inevitable decline towards extinction. It is rare for humans to encounter the Avatar of Khaine, unless they go to war against the Eldari or accompany those who do. To its lament, the Imperium of Man has faced the Eldari many times during the long and bloody history of the two species, and records of the Avatar and the carnage it has created against humanity can be found by canny rogue traders amongst the accounts of the Administratum and the sacred writings of the Adeptus Ministorum. There are as many interpretations of the Avatar as there are accounts. However, those who seek to learn more are likely to find that many of those explanations conflict. Some liken the Avatar to a mechanical engine of war, while others claim it to be a demon of battle given form by an ancient Eldari warrior. What they all can more or less agree upon is the effect the Avatar has upon those Eldari which march beside it, boosting their courage and filling the normally fragile alien with a deep and violent lust for war. Through these avatars, Khaine continues to live on as some form of entity of the warp, although maybe not a servant of chaos, but of order. Shattered, but he is one of the 3 Eldar gods to have survived the fall. And those were 40 facts on Segura, Khaine, and Isha. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This is Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.